Hello world, this is Frank from the beautiful Alps in South Tyrol, and in today's video we'll be covering how to read a research paper in machine learning.
Starting out with tip number 1, the 3-pass process. It helps you skim over many papers at a time. As an example, I took a paper of the nice topic of machine reasoning that I'm currently interested in to show you how you should apply the 3-stage process. The first stage is basically a quick scan to get a bird's eye view of the paper. What you do in the first stage is you read the title, the abstract and the introduction, and basically you ignore all the rest. You may read the subheadings to get a feeling of what the paper is about, and you may also read the conclusion to learn about the results of the paper and what came out of it. Also ask yourself if the paper is well written, if the figures look good, and if the experiments deserve their name. Alright, so summing up, this first stage is basically reading all this stuff and deciding whether it's worth reading and relevant to you, and if it isn't, just move on, set it aside and go to the next paper. But if the paper caught your attention, you move on to stage 2. Now in the second stage you read every bit of the paper, this time with greater care, but ignore details such as proofs. You may want to print out the paper as well, so that you can write down key points or make comments on the margins as you read. So you essentially try to become an expert for this paper. You try to understand figures, diagrams, illustrations, most calculations and formulas. You can check the related work section so that you get a rough overview of the related literature, and mark down interesting papers for future reference. And you may also want to read them down the line. For me, the second stage usually takes up to 1 hour of my time, depending on the length of the paper, even more or a bit less. To fully understand a paper, a third pass is required. In the third stage, you attempt to virtually re-implement the paper. So you spin up your IDE, and by making the same assumptions as the authors, you try and recreate the work from scratch. By comparing this recreation with the actual paper, you can then identify not only a paper's innovations, but also its hidden failings and assumptions. This stage requires great attention to detail. You should identify and challenge every assumption, every statement. Also, you should think about how you yourself would represent a particular idea. This will sharpen your toolset, and each time you do it, you will become faster. This stage can take up to 4 or 5 hours for beginners, and about an hour or 2 for an experienced reader, depending on how far you go with your implementation. At the end of this pass, you should be able to reconstruct the entire structure of the paper from memory, as well as be able to identify its strong and weak points. My second tip is to take notes regularly. This tip might be obvious, but it's massively important. Especially if you read many papers, you want to be able to transfer important concepts from short-term to long-term memory. So you have to take them down. My personal way of doing so is to take 3 separate types of notes. Firstly, I take down the main ideas of the paper very roughly. Secondly, I take down stuff that I did not understand to be able to Google it later. And thirdly, I take down stuff that I find interesting, especially if you plan on conducting your own research. Those are mostly random thoughts that come up while reading the paper. Personally, my practical approach to this is to take a fresh A4 sheet of paper for each article I read, and if you want to be really efficient about this, you can try and organize them in a kind of tree-like structure to make sense of the relationships between the different articles you read. The last but not least of my tips for you is to use all external resources that are at your disposal. These days there really is a lot of stuff that helps you understand research papers, starting from Medium posts on papers, especially for really popular ones, Reddit discussions, as well as Stack Overflow questions, and even GitHub logs, issues and discussions. Another great resource that I use often is Archive Sanitizer, that helps find articles related to the work in front of you and makes it a bit easier to organize the sea of knowledge. It's often easier to get a good first idea on papers using these resources, as people might have already done some of the work that you are about to do as well.
If you want to become good at reading research papers, it's important that you push through complications and frustration. Even the best among us went through these times, and only if you persist you can get a champion. it's important that you stay curious. In the end, curiosity is what drives us forward in this field. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to comment below if you liked it, and also subscribe and follow me on my GitHub blog where I post about research papers in the field. I hope that we see each other soon, and until then, have a good time.